Natural events and disasters have affected the Everglade ecosystem for thousands of years. The Everglades formed about 3,200 years ago, as the pace of rising sea levels slowed down considerably. This allowed a buildup of mud, shells, and sand along Florida's most southern coast. The resulting ridge then kept water from passing over it. It also retained rainfall and overflow from Lake Okeechobee, thereby forming a freshwater environment, which we now call the Everglades. Although now ocean sea levels are rising very fast due to climate change.
One of the effects of climate change is the rise in sea level, which affects special species that only live in southern Florida, such as tropical orchids and herbs. The rise in sea level causes salinization of groundwater and the soil above.
Over the last 50 years, researchers have observed an increase in the water level at some inland freshwater sites in the park. This suggests that the influence of sea level rise may reach far inland. People have affected the Everglades majorly. Dr. Tom Wentz said, "In the past 100 years, people have been digging canals and building dams so they could take water out of it to develop agriculture and build homes. We've built so many canals and drained so much water that the natural flow is interrupted. As a result, the Everglades are now half of their original size."
Although with more and more people came more and more pollution.
Especially phosphorus from the fertilizers used in agricultural areas north and south of Lake Okeechobee. The Everglades is unique because of the low levels of nutrients, such as phosphorus. But the nutrient pollution coming from the agricultural runoff and other fertilizers allows for the growth of invasive species that upset the balance of the ecosystem, such as cattails, harmful algal blooms, and duckweed.
The sulfur in this agricultural fertilizer leads to accumulations of toxic mercury in fish, birds, reptiles, and mammals, even in the endangered Florida panther. Another large impact that humans have had on the Everglade ecosystem is invasive species. An example of this is the Burmese python. People purchase the python when the snake is young and only 30 centimeters long. They keep the reptile for a few years, although the python grows rapidly and gets as big as 6.7 meters. Often the snake gets too large to care for and owners release the animal into the wild. This becomes a problem because the Burmese python has no predator in the Everglades, and they eat almost anything. They're beginning to mass populate and upset the balance of the ecosystem, therefore causing harm to the natural food chain.
Evidence suggests that the rapid production of lionfish may have the potential to significantly impact other native species in the Everglades. Lionfish can eat prey that are more than half of their own length and are known to eat more than 70 marine fish and invertebrate species. These species include the yellowtail snapper, the Nasu grouper, the parrotfish, and the red-banded coral shrimp. They also compete for food with the native predators such as the grouper and the snapper. Negatively impact the reef habitats on the outskirts of the Everglades by eliminating organisms that serve important economic roles. A good example of this would be when they eat herbivorous fish that keep algae in check. After the first sighting of lionfish in 2010, the park developed a prevention strategy that calls for the removal of lionfish from specific areas within the park. Park biologists constantly survey the park, and when they find a lionfish, they remove it to study and find out more about its habits and diet. A well-focused area in the Everglades is the hard-bottom ledge habitat in southern Florida Bay.
Humans have also managed to have a negative impact on the nutrient cycles in the Everglades. We have increased the amount of mercury, sulfur, phosphorus, and nitrogen released into the soil and air from agriculture, fertilizers, motorized boats, and industrialization. Due to this, species such as the native sawgrass, which is used to low phosphorus environment, is getting taken over by cattails.
A drought, a 200-year event, occurred in 1981, followed shortly by hurricane-induced floods during 1983. These events served as the breaking point between considering the problems and initiating solutions. In 1983, Governor Bob Graham began his Save Our Everglades campaign, calling for the restoration of the previously gutted Kissimmee River, the reinstallation of natural flows into the ENP, and the protection of a variety of threatened species native to the region. Questions about the quality of water in Lake Okeechobee arose in 1986 as a huge algae bloom consumed the surface of the lake. The new algae growth signified a change in the nutrient loading in the lake and made obvious the need for legislation controlling water quality. In response, the Surface Water Improvement Act in 1987 was passed, requiring, among other things, a mandatory 40% reduction in the phosphorus loading in Lake Okeechobee by 1992. The most recent piece of legislation supporting Everglades restoration was Governor Lawton Child's Everglades Forever Act, which passed in 1994.
People have been affecting the food chain of the Everglades since day one. Taking animals and resources from it has affected it drastically. Alligators have been hunted in southern Florida for many years. They are mostly hunted for their skin and occasionally simply for sport. Their numbers have been dropping subtly, which is affecting the food chain. Now, the numbers of small fish and other vertebrate species are climbing.
This diagram represents how the mass population of a species decreases by 10% as each trophic level increases by 1. But the population of each species may vary according to how much the abiotic components of the ecosystem vary. In the Everglades, people have drastically changed the abiotic components and the nutrient cycles to match their needs and wants, therefore disrupting the flow of energy and nutrients within the ecosystem. This then affects the mass population of each species. For example, if the nutrients that the primary producers need to survive lessens, then the primary producers diminishes, affecting the primary consumers because they rely on the primary producers for food. And as the population of the primary consumers goes down, so does that of the secondary consumers because they rely on the primary consumers for food. Last but not least, this affects the tertiary consumers, such as this alligator, because they rely on both the primary and secondary consumers for food. Therefore, their mass population also goes down. As you can see, the activities of humans in the Everglades has majorly disrupted the ecosystem.